Hi everyone, today's date is the 14th of February, Valentine's Day 2022, and as promised, this would be just a final update of the carnivore trial that I did, and I've also got a little bit of footage of my pelvic floor ultrasound. So I've just had my cholesterol test back. I got my cholesterol checked at the end of 3 weeks. I did, as I said in my previous video, I did have to cut the carnivore trial short because I wasn't feeling very well. But whether that was because I just had a cold, I also lost a lot of weight and was also starting to get coccyx pain again. And I was only opening my bowels about every 4 or 5 days. Now, as some of you may already know, I do have a condition called familial hypercholesterolemia, which is genetically high cholesterol. So there is a defect in my genetics which makes me more vulnerable to having strokes, heart attacks, etc. And my cholesterol when I was in my late 20s was like nearly 6, even though I was eating relatively healthy. And I've been on statins now for about 10 years. I'm currently on 40 milligram of atorvastatin. And yeah, so I was a bit nervous about doing the carnivore trial. Now, the last blood test I had, which was about 6-7 months ago, my overall cholesterol was about 4.1. Bearing in mind that's been on 40 milligram of atorvastatin, and that has gone up to 5.1. Now, normally 5.1 would be normal for most people, but most people wouldn't be on 40 milligram of atorvastatin. And if anything, because I've had DNA testing, which has come back positive, there is talk of putting me up to 80 milligram, which is normally the standard for people with this defect. Yes, it has gone up, but not as much as I thought it would have gone up. You've got to bear in mind, I've been eating sausages, burgers, steak every day, occasional bit of fish, eggs. So yes, lots and lots of fat. You would think it would go a lot higher than that. So for somebody that's not on a statin, you could probably expect it to go up by a factor of 1. So if, say, somebody was normally about 4.7, 4.8, you could expect to go up to late 5s, 5.8, 5.9. So yes, it isn't quite an increase, but not a huge increase. Unfortunately, I don't have my triglycerides level readings. That's the actual fat that's consumed. I don't actually have that to hand. It's not been given to me this time, because that's normally an indicator of the amount of fat that's been consumed, which I guess, again, would be quite high. And I don't have the LDL and the HDL levels, HDL being the protective mechanism that you have with cholesterol. So, in conclusion, is the carnivore diet worth doing? Yes and no. It's a very restrictive diet. However, I did notice changes. I had times of calmness in my body. But was that because I wasn't eating any sugar? Because I was having, sometimes sugar in my diet and a lot of high carbs. And it just makes you wonder, because you're cutting out all sugar, you're cutting out everything basically. So it's not really a true picture. But it has taught me that these carbs are no good for me, especially the white potatoes and the binge eating on the carbs. So I have stopped eating white potatoes. And I am like, for my lunch, I will just eat meat now. And for my tea, I'll have some meat and probably some vegetables, but Pacific vegetables. And I tend to eat porridge in the morning with maybe a little bit of fruit. I was checking my blood sugars during this trial, and as I said, I was having episodes of almost hypoglycemia type episodes, which did diminish as the time went on. And my blood sugars did stabilise a lot more. And since I've changed my diet again, they've gone up to like 7 or 8 post meal, whereas on the carnivore diet, they're around about the 4s, the 5s, within a safe range basically. So you do get a stabilisation of sugars, but again, is that because you're not eating the sugary foods? Because sugar's in a lot of foods that you don't even realise. So you've got to bear that in mind. So yes and no, basically. I've learned a lot. It's taught me a lot, really, that I am going to cut out a lot of these sugars, which are no good. and try and eat a lot more. I'm not going to eat the oxalate foods. Like I was eating spinach and lentils and all this rubbish. I don't believe in any of that now. I really don't. I mean, there's some people that eat raw meat. I do know someone that's eaten raw meat, and her parents, who are both 80 and in perfect health, and they've been eating raw meat for a number of years. And Yeah, there are some people that do that. I recently came across an account of a chap, and I can't think of his name. I think it was Rhonda Plants. He's now deceased, but he was a big proponent against the food industry, saying it was a conspiracy, and he had his own major health problems. And it was the Native Americans that persuaded him, I believe, to start eating raw meat, and he recovered, and he was literally starving himself to death. You can actually find him on YouTube, but there's not a lot out there. Vanderplants, his name is Anjon Plants. But yes, it's worth checking him out, definitely. So yes, I will be taking things back from this and definitely adjusting my diet. Is it enough to cure pelvic floor dysfunction? Probably not, but it will have its own benefits. Now, I did recently go to see the original pelvic floor physio I saw 2.5 years ago that diagnosed me with potential neuralgia, and she allowed me to film my ultrasound that I had done on my pelvic floor, which showed there was no movement and it was in a state of severe contraction. Now, before I did DCT, I was bleeding very severely, and DCT did stop the bleeding. I did have some benefits from that. But then I started to have significant injuries, hence why I stopped DCT. And obviously Dave McCoy's walked away from it, with Rocco's gone away from it, and no one can seem to agree on anything anymore. So while it did have its pluses, there's a lot of flaws with it. And as somebody said to me, would you go back to doing it? I would never say never, but I think it's time to move on, look at other avenues. There is another method out there which I'm very interested in. I have a great torsion of my left ilium bone, very unilateral, and there's certain muscles I couldn't fire up in with DCT, and that doesn't make any sense to me unless I start looking at the whole bigger picture. And there is another method out there, and it will cost me a lot of money to go and see this person, and with the travelling time to go to London, and I'm not going to get people's hopes up, so I'm not going to document the journey of doing that. There is somebody already in the world who I do know who's doing it, and I think he's seen some results. But these things take time, research, and there's a lot of avenues you can go down, and you don't get anywhere. You said, I tried bone therapy, for instance. I recently went to see a spiritual healer who didn't actually charge anything. And he was able to turn off all my symptoms, be it only for 20 hours or more, but he turned them off. And then I did actually think at one point, the mind connection with this, the personality, the fight and, the fight and flight response. And there was recently something I came across where somebody was talking about tight muscles, and they were able to turn off those tight muscles by telling their own body that they weren't tight and there was actually nothing wrong with them. So because there was nothing wrong with them, the symptoms diminished. So is there a mind-body connection with this? You can look at the work of Dr. Sarnos, for instance. It might be worth looking into. Something I've not really looked into it much, but the mind-body relationship to this. So let's have a look at this ultrasound now. So here we have an ultrasound of my pelvic floor. At the top here is just abdominal tissue, and this big black mass here that you can see like a kidney bean, kidney type shape, is the bladder, and just actually under the bladder you have the pelvic floor muscles, as evidenced by this white line, a bit like a shelf, so to speak. So when you actually breathe in, the pelvic floor should actually go down as the diaphragm goes down, and as you breathe out, the pelvic floor should rise with it as the diaphragm goes up. So if we look here carefully, as I breathe in, you can't really see any movement of my actual pelvic floor going down. It is almost very, very rigid, and there should actually be movement there. So here I am. I'm just taking a couple more breaths, breathing in and out, breathing in and out. And just look at that white line, look at the pelvic floor. It's hardly moving at all. It's completely rigid. It's in a state of, it's over, stiffened up really. It's hypertonic. Just no bloody movement in the bloody bugger. So we're now doing, for comparison, an ultrasound on the actual pelvic physio's pelvic floor. And here I'm pointing to her bladder, and just below it you'll see the white line, which is the pelvic floor muscles. That's me just pointing there to her pelvic floor. So now she's just trying to contract her pelvic floor, and if you just look at the white line going up and then down, contracting the pelvic floor, going up and down. Here we have quick contractions of the pelvic floor, which is what it should be like normally. So comparison with me on the left, the pelvic physio is on the right, quick contractions of the pelvic floor. The right, you can clearly see it going up and down, mine you can't. So as we can see, my pelvic floor is definitely not moving, and even though DCT stopped the bleeding, I would expect better results than this. And it's a shame, really. I didn't have a pelvic floor ultrasound during the height of DCT, and obviously when I started, but no one seems to offer it, and it's took me this long to be able to get one. So there's a comparison. It's crazy, really, really, isn't it? Hi there, Chris. I told you, didn't I? You should have had a pelvic floor ultrasound at the height of DCT. Then you would have known what the hell was going on. I know. I should have had one, shouldn't I? But I didn't. Yeah, I know. Very silly, I know. So there we have it. There we have it. So yeah, I'll keep you updated on what more, different avenues I'm going to explore. Yeah, so we'll keep you updated. Thank you.